I walked out of the interview room with my shoulders heavy. I had just lost a job that could have changed my life. I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I simply turned and walked away, thinking of my son waiting at home. But just as the glass door was about to close behind me, the entire lobby fell silent. A voice rang out, calling my name with unmistakable urgency. Why would a billionaire CEO chase down a man who had just been rejected? The morning light crept through the thin curtains of our small apartment on the third floor of a building in Chicago that had seen better days. I moved quietly through the narrow kitchen, my body running on the fumes of a night shift that had ended not long ago. My hands still carrying the faint smell of industrial cleaning solution, cracked eggs into a pan with practiced precision. At 35, I had learned that exhaustion was just another thing a man could get used to. I worked the night shift at Sterling Financial, pushing a mop across marble floors so the place would shine for the executives the next day. It was honest work, it paid the bills, most of them anyway, and it gave me something no other job could offer, the chance to be home when my son woke up. The bedroom door creaked open and Isaiah appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. At 8 years old, the boy was small for his age. With his mother's gentle eyes and my quiet strength, he shuffled toward the kitchen table and I heard it. The slight wheeze in his breathing. The familiar whistle that meant his lungs were fighting again. I set the plate of eggs in front of my son and reached for the inhaler on the counter. It was nearly empty. I shook it, calculating in my head how many more doses it could give before I would need to find the money for a refill. Without insurance, each inhaler cost what I made in 2 nights of work. Isaiah took the inhaler without complaint, breathed in the medication, and then looked up at me with eyes too observant for a child his age. Dad, are you tired? I forced a smile. I'm fine, buddy. Eat your breakfast. But Isaiah kept watching me the way he always did, as if he could see through the walls I built. The boy had been like this ever since his mother died in a car accident 4 years ago. One moment I had a wife, a career in customer service at a telecommunications company, a life that made sense. The next moment I was standing in a hospital hallway trying to understand words that didn't fit together. We did everything we could. After the funeral, I tried to go back to work, but Isaiah needed me. He needed someone to hold him through the nightmares, to sit with him during the asthma attacks that seemed to come more frequently after losing his mother. I took leave, then more leave. And when I finally tried to return to the workforce, I discovered that the world had moved on without me. The gap in my resume was a canyon that no explanation could bridge. Customer service positions went to younger candidates, fresher faces, people without 4 years of grief written into the lines around their eyes. So I took what I could get. Night janitor at a building where I once might have worked in a corner office. It was a step down, several steps down, but it let me be the father Isaiah needed. Isaiah finished his eggs and slid off his chair. Before heading to get dressed for school, he stopped by my side and slipped something into the pocket of my worn jacket hanging by the door. I pretended not to notice. This was our ritual. Isaiah's little notes scribbled on scraps of paper, hidden where I would find them later. I never read them right away. I saved them for the moments when the weight of the world pressed too hard, when I needed a reminder of why I kept going. An hour later, I walked Isaiah to school, holding his small hand as we navigated the crowded sidewalks. At the gate, Isaiah hugged me tight. Have a good sleep, Dad. I kissed the top of my son's head. Have a good day, buddy. I'll pick you up this afternoon. I watched Isaiah disappear through the school doors, then turned and walked home, my feet heavy with the exhaustion I had hidden from my son. Back in the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and was asleep within minutes. That evening, I clocked in for my shift at Sterling Financial. The building was a tower of glass and steel, home to one of the most successful financial services companies in the country. During the day, it buzzed with executives in tailored suits, analysts staring at multiple screens, assistants rushing between meetings, At night, it belonged to people like me, the invisible ones who made sure the marble floors gleamed and the trash bins were empty by morning. I was mopping the hallway on the 12th floor when I saw it. A notice pinned to the bulletin board near the break room, the kind of board that employees walked past without a second glance. But tonight, something made me stop. Customer service specialist, day shift, full benefits, including health insurance. I read the words 3 times, day shift. That meant I could drop Isaiah off at school and pick him up in the afternoon. Full benefits. That meant insurance. Real insurance. The kind that would cover Isaiah's inhalers, his doctor visits, the emergency room trips that came without warning. I stood there, mop in hand, staring at the notice as if it might disappear. I had done this job before, customer service. I had been good at it, better than good. I knew how to listen, how to calm an angry caller, how to solve problems that others had given up on. That skill hadn't left me, even if the world had decided it no longer counted. But applying meant exposing myself. It meant sitting across from people who would look at my resume and see the gap, the years of pushing a mop instead of building a career. It meant answering questions I had learned to avoid. Why did you leave your previous job? What have you been doing for the past 4 years? Why should we take a chance on you? I turned away from the bulletin board. I pushed my mop down the hallway, trying to convince myself that it wasn't worth the risk. I had stability now. Not much, but enough. Why trade that for the humiliation of rejection? But the notice stayed in my mind. It followed me through the rest of my shift, through the floors I cleaned and the trash I emptied. It was still there when I clocked out in the morning and walked home through streets just beginning to fill with people heading to their own jobs. Back in the apartment, Isaiah was still asleep. I sat down at the old computer in the corner of the living room, the one I had bought secondhand years ago. I opened a browser and found the job listing on the company website. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about Isaiah's inhaler, nearly empty. I thought about the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the ones I shuffled like cards, deciding which could wait another month. I thought about my son asking if I was tired, those knowing eyes seeing too much. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the note Isaiah had slipped in that morning. I unfolded the crumpled paper and read the words written in a child's uneven handwriting. Dad, I dreamed you were smiling. Something cracked open in my chest. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of them, the hope buried inside them. When was the last time Isaiah had seen me smile? Really smile? When was the last time I had given my son something to dream about other than survival? I turned back to the computer. My hands were steady as I filled out the application, typing answers to questions that felt like confessions. I wrote about my experience, my skills, the 4 years I had spent doing whatever it took to keep my family together. When I reached the section asking about my current employment, I wrote the truth. Night janitor, Sterling Financial. My finger hovered over the submit button. One click and there was no taking it back. One click and I would be asking the world to see me as something more than a man with a mop. I thought about my son asleep in the next room. I thought about the dreams Isaiah had, dreams where his father was smiling. I clicked submit. The confirmation message appeared on the screen and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For better or worse, I had taken the first step. Now all I could do was wait and hope that this time the world would give me a chance. A few days after submitting my application, I received an email. My hands trembled slightly as I read the words. We would like to invite you for an interview. The interview was set for the next Monday afternoon. I read the email 5 times before I allowed myself to believe it was real. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and doubt. I rehearsed answers to questions I imagined they would ask, pacing the small living room while Isaiah watched cartoons. I practiced explaining the gap in my resume, trying to find words that sounded like reasons rather than excuses. By the night before the interview, I had convinced myself a dozen times to cancel and a dozen times to go through with it. On the morning of the interview, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror wearing a suit I had borrowed from Mr. Donnelly, the retired postal worker who lived 2 floors down. The jacket was slightly too big in the shoulders, and the pants needed a belt pulled tight to stay up, but it was the best I could do. I adjusted my tie, the only piece of clothing in the outfit that actually belonged to me, a gift from my wife on our 3rd anniversary. Isaiah appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, watching me with curious eyes. "Dad, where are you going? You look fancy." I turned from the mirror and knelt down to my son's level. "I'm going to a job interview, buddy." "A new job?" Isaiah's eyebrows lifted. "Is it better than your old job?" I considered how to answer. "If I get it, I'll be working during the day instead of at night. That means I can be home with you every evening." And I hesitated, not wanting to make promises I might not be able to keep, and you'll be able to see the doctor whenever you need to, without us worrying about money. Isaiah's face shifted into something that looked almost like hope. "So you have to get it, Dad. I'm going to try my best." Isaiah disappeared into his room and returned a moment later with a small piece of paper folded into a square. He tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of my borrowed jacket right over my heart. I smiled. "What does this one say?" "You can't read it until later," Isaiah said firmly. "That's the rule." "Okay, buddy, that's the rule." I hugged my son tight, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and breakfast cereal. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, carrying nothing but a folder with my resume and a note I wasn't allowed to read. The interview was held in a conference room on the 15th floor of Sterling Financial, 3 floors above where I spent my nights mopping hallways. I had never been to this part of the building during daylight hours. Everything looked different when the sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, when the hallways bustled with people in professional attire, when the elevator required a key card to access the executive levels. 3 people sat across the conference table from me. The man in the center was Gregory Hale, the head of human resources. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. To his left sat Michelle Grant, the customer service manager, a practical-looking woman who flipped through my resume with what appeared to be genuine interest. On the right was Ryan Carter, a young HR associate who seemed more focused on his tablet than on the candidate in front of him. The interview began well. Michelle led the questioning at first, asking about my approach to handling difficult customers, my experience with conflict resolution, my ability to work under pressure. These were questions I knew how to answer. I spoke about my years at the telecommunications company, the techniques I had developed for de-escalating tense situations, the satisfaction I found in turning an angry caller into a loyal customer. Michelle nodded as I spoke, occasionally making notes. "Your experience is impressive, Mr. Brooks. We don't often see candidates with such a strong background in customer relations." I allowed myself a small breath of hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe they would see past the circumstances that had brought me here. Then Gregory Hale leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Mr. Brooks, I'd like to discuss something that stands out in your application." His voice was pleasant, but his eyes had the sharpness of a man preparing to dissect something. "You mentioned that you're currently employed here at Sterling Financial in the custodial department." "That's correct. Can you help me understand how someone with your background ended up in that role? Your resume shows significant experience in customer service. Why the career change?" I had prepared for this question. I had rehearsed the words 100 times. But sitting here under the fluorescent lights and the weight of Gregory Hale's gaze, the rehearsed answer felt hollow. I told the truth instead. My wife passed away 4 years ago. Our son was 4 at the time he needed me. Taking care of him became my priority, and when I was ready to return to work, the job market had moved on. Custodial work offered flexibility. I could work nights and still be there for my son during the day. Michelle's expression softened. Ryan Carter looked up from his tablet for the first time, but Gregory Hale's face remained unchanged. "I see. And your son, he's still in the picture?" still requiring this flexibility. I felt something tighten in my chest. My son is 8 years old. He has chronic asthma. He needs regular medical care and a parent who can be there for him. Gregory Hale nodded slowly, as if processing this information. Mr. Brooks, I appreciate your candor, but I have to ask, do you believe your personal circumstances might affect your ability to perform in this role? We have very high standards here. Our culture demands complete dedication. The word culture hung in the air between us. I had heard it before. The polite code word that meant I didn't fit, didn't belong, wasn't the right type. I looked at Michelle, who had lowered her eyes to the resume in front of her. I looked at Ryan, who had returned his attention to his tablet. Neither of them would meet my gaze. I understood. Then the interview was over. It had been over the moment Gregory Hale saw my current job title. Everything since then had been theater, a performance of fairness before an inevitable rejection. I had a choice. I could continue to play along, to answer questions designed to disqualify me, to watch them document reasons that had nothing to do with my ability and everything to do with their assumptions. Or I could leave with the only thing they couldn't take from me. I stood up. I think I have my answer. Gregory Hale blinked. We haven't finished the interview, Mr. Brooks. Yes, I said quietly. We have. Thank you for your time. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my back straight, my steps measured. Behind me, I heard Gregory Hale's voice saying something about following up, but the words meant nothing. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and watched the numbers descend. The lobby of Sterling Financial was a cathedral of marble and glass. I had cleaned these floors more times than I could count, had polished the brass fixtures until they gleamed, had emptied the trash bins, hidden discreetly behind decorative panels. I knew every corner of this space, but I had always known it in darkness, in emptiness, in the quiet hours when the building belonged to people like me. Now, in the middle of the afternoon, the lobby was alive with people. Executives crossed the marble floor with purpose in their stride. Visitors checked in at the reception desk. A group of employees laughed together near the coffee kiosk. None of them noticed the man in the borrowed suit walking toward the exit. None of them saw me at all. I was almost at the glass doors when I heard my name, Darius Brooks. The voice was clear, authoritative, and loud enough to carry across the entire lobby. I stopped. I turned around. A woman was moving toward me with urgent purpose. She was in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back from a face that carried both elegance and steel. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. People stepped out of her way as she crossed the lobby, not because she pushed them aside, but because her presence commanded space. I recognized her from the portraits that hung in the executive corridor, from the company newsletters I sometimes glanced at while emptying recycling bins. Vivian Sterling, the founder and CEO, the first Black woman to build a billion-dollar financial services company. The name on the building. She stopped in front of me, her eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. "You're leaving?" she said. It wasn't a question. The interview didn't go as planned. I imagine it didn't. Her gaze shifted briefly to the elevator bank where Gregory Hale and the rest of the interview panel had just emerged, their faces registering surprise at the scene unfolding in the lobby. "Walk with me for a moment." I hesitated. "Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate whatever this is, but I don't need anyone's pity." "Good," she said, "because I don't have any to give." She turned and walked toward a quiet alcove near the windows, clearly expecting me to follow. Against my better judgment, I did. When we were out of earshot of the gathering crowd, Vivian spoke again. "I know who you are, Mr. Brooks. Not from your application. I don't review applications for customer service positions. I know you from something else." I frowned. "I don't understand." A few months ago, late at night, a young woman sitting alone in this lobby, crying, papers scattered everywhere. Do you remember? The memory surfaced slowly. A night like any other near the end of my shift. A girl barely out of college, sitting on one of the leather benches, her bag overturned, documents spilled across the floor. I had found her while making my rounds. I remember her, I said slowly. She was an intern. Someone had embarrassed her in front of her whole department, told her she didn't belong here. Vivian nodded. What did you do? I just helped her pick up her papers, talked to her for a few minutes. I shrugged. It wasn't anything special. What did you say to her? I thought back. She asked me how I dealt with people telling me I didn't belong. I told her that I'd heard it plenty of times myself, but I was still here and that she would be too if she wanted to be. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I was in the elevator when that happened. The doors were closing, but I saw everything. I heard what you said to her. I didn't know how to respond. That intern is still here, Vivian continued. She's been promoted twice. Last month, she told me that the only reason she didn't quit that night was because a janitor sat down next to her and reminded her that the people who say you don't belong don't get to decide who you are. Before I could respond, Gregory Hale appeared at Vivian's side, slightly out of breath from crossing the lobby. Mrs. Sterling, is everything all right? This candidate was just leaving, I'm aware. Vivian's voice was ice. Tell me, Gregory, why is he leaving? Gregory Hale straightened his tie. We determined that he wasn't the right fit for our company culture. Our culture, Vivian repeated. The culture I built. Tell me what specifically about Mr. Brooks doesn't fit. Gregory Hale's mouth opened and closed. There were concerns about commitment, reliability, given his circumstances. His circumstances, Vivian said flatly. You mean the fact that he's a single father, or the fact that he currently works in custodial services? Or perhaps something else about him that you noticed before he even walked into the room? The color drained from Gregory Hale's face. Michelle Grant and Ryan Carter had joined us now, standing at an uncertain distance. Mrs. Sterling, I can assure you that our process was completely Mrs. Grant. Vivian's gaze shifted. How did Mr. Brooks perform on the skills-based questions? Michelle swallowed. Excellently. His answers were some of the best I've heard from any candidate this quarter. So, the problem wasn't his qualifications. Silence. Vivian turned back to me. Her voice softened, though it lost none of its strength. I know what you're feeling right now. I know you want to walk out of here and never look back. I know that staying feels like surrender, like letting them win. My jaw tightened. You don't know what I'm feeling. I know exactly what you're feeling, because 30 years ago, I stood in a lobby just like this one, being told that someone like me didn't belong in the rooms where decisions were made. I walked out that day with my dignity intact and my career in ruins. It took me 5 more years to get another chance. She held my gaze. You have a son who's waiting for you to come home. He's depending on you, and right now you're trying to decide whether your pride is worth more than his future. The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought of Isaiah sitting in our small apartment waiting to hear if his father had gotten the job that would change everything. I thought of the inhaler that was almost empty, the doctor's appointments we kept postponing, the bills that multiplied no matter how many hours I worked. I reached into the inside pocket of my borrowed jacket and pulled out the folded note. My hands were unsteady as I opened it. The words were written in Isaiah's careful, uneven letters. Dad, no matter what happens, you're number one to me. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. When I looked up, Vivian was still watching me. I'm not staying for you, I said quietly. I'm staying for him and for myself. Vivian nodded once. That's the only reason worth staying for. I started my new position on a Monday morning. I arrived 30 minutes before my shift began, wearing my own clothes this time, a button-down shirt and slacks I had purchased. With the signing bonus Vivian had insisted be included in my offer. The borrowed suit had been returned to Mr. Donnelly with a bottle of wine and a handshake that said more than words could. My desk was on the 12th floor in the same hallway I had mopped countless times before. Now I walked past those floors as an employee, not a shadow. My colleagues watched me with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to name. Everyone knew the story or some version of it. The janitor who had confronted the CEO, the interview that had turned into a standoff in the lobby, the man who should have been rejected but somehow wasn't. Gregory Hale remained in his position. Vivian had not fired him, though I later learned she had called him into her office for a conversation that lasted nearly 2 hours. Whatever was said behind those closed doors, Gregory Hale emerged a quieter man. He still walked the halls with authority, still conducted meetings with his practiced smile, but something in his eyes had shifted. A crack in the armor he had worn for so long. The first 2 weeks were a test I had expected. I felt the weight of scrutiny in every interaction, the silent question behind every glance, does he really belong here? I answered not with words but with work. I arrived early and stayed until my tasks were complete. I studied the company systems, learned the protocols, memorized the scripts that customer service representatives were expected to follow, and then set them aside when the moment required something more human. My first difficult call came on my third day, an elderly woman, confused and frustrated, trying to understand why her account had been frozen. She had been transferred 4 times before reaching me. Her voice trembled with the kind of exhaustion that comes from being ignored. I listened, I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to offer solutions or defend company policy. I simply let her speak until she had emptied herself of all the frustration she had been carrying. When she finished, I said, "Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry this happened to you. Let me see what I can do to fix it." 20 minutes later, her account was restored, and she had my direct extension in case anything went wrong again. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me. "You're the first person who actually heard me." During my second week, Ryan Carter approached me in the break room. The young HR associate had been a silent presence in that disastrous interview, his eyes fixed on his tablet while Gregory Hale dismantled my dignity one question at a time. Now he stood awkwardly by the coffee machine, clearly working up the courage to speak. "I wanted to apologize," Ryan finally said, "for the interview. I knew those questions weren't fair. I knew what was happening, and I just sat there." I poured myself a cup of coffee before responding. "Why did you stay quiet?" Ryan's shoulders sagged. I was scared. Scared of Gregory, scared of making waves, scared of becoming a target myself. I considered this for a moment. I understand fear. I felt it plenty of times, but staying silent doesn't make the fear go away. It just teaches you to live with it. Ryan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. He didn't say anything else, but from that day forward, he made a point of sitting with me during lunch. Small conversations grew into something resembling friendship. Not deep, not yet, but real. The first evening I came home before dark felt like stepping into a different life. I had spent so many years existing in the margins of my son's day, a presence in the early morning, a voice on the phone during lunch breaks, a father who was always either leaving for work or recovering from it. Now I walked through the apartment door while the sun still hung low in the sky. And Isaiah looked up from his homework with surprise. "Dad, you're home already?" "I'm home." I hung my jacket by the door and joined my son at the small kitchen table. "Need help with anything?" Isaiah shook his head, but he kept glancing at me as if expecting me to disappear. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. Isaiah on his math problems, me on emails I could have answered tomorrow. The normalcy of it felt almost strange. "Dad," Isaiah's voice was small, "are you happy now?" I looked at my son, at the boy who had carried so much worry on shoulders too young to bear it. I thought about the question carefully because Isaiah deserved an honest answer. "I'm getting there, buddy. I'm trying. And you help me more than you know." Isaiah smiled, a rare, full smile that reminded me of his mother. For a moment, the grief was there. It was always there, but it didn't consume me. It simply existed alongside everything else. The love, the hope, the possibility of something better. The real test came a few weeks in. A major client threatened to terminate their contract after a series of service failures that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with the department's reputation. The account was worth millions. Losing it would mean layoffs, budget cuts, the kind of corporate crisis that ended careers. Gregory Hale convened an emergency meeting to discuss who should handle the client meeting. His eyes swept over the room, landing on everyone except me. We need someone with experience, someone the client will trust. Michelle Grant, who had watched me work for nearly a month, spoke up. I recommend Darius Brooks. He has the best de-escalation skills in this department. I've seen him turn around situations that seemed impossible. Gregory Hale's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The weight of what had happened in the lobby hung over us all. The public confrontation, the CEO's intervention, the unspoken understanding that the old rules no longer applied. I got the assignment. The meeting with the client took place in a conference room on the executive floor. The client was an older man, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who had built his success on never being satisfied with less than perfection. He entered the room already furious. I didn't defend the company. I didn't make excuses or promises. Instead, I asked a question. Mr. Lawson, can you tell me exactly what made you feel disrespected? The question caught the client off guard. For a moment, the anger in his eyes flickered into something else. Surprise, perhaps? Or the beginning of recognition that someone was finally listening. 45 minutes later, the contract was saved. As we shook hands, the client said, "This is the first time I felt like this company actually gives a damn." Several weeks after I started, Gregory Hale called me into his office. I walked in prepared for confrontation, for some final attempt to reassert the old hierarchy. Instead, I found Gregory sitting behind his desk with an expression I had never seen on him before, something that looked almost like humility. "I was wrong about you," Gregory said. The words came out stiffly, like a language he was still learning to speak. I let the silence stretch before responding. "You were wrong about a lot of people like me." Gregory Hale held my gaze. "I know." There was no handshake, no apology that would erase what had happened, just acknowledgement. A small crack in a wall that had taken decades to build. I understood that this wasn't redemption. It was simply a beginning. A few months after I started my new position, I stood by the window of a conference room on the 12th floor. I had just finished leading an orientation session for new hires. Part of my responsibilities as senior customer service specialist, a promotion that had come quietly without fanfare, simply an email from Michelle Grant, recognizing what everyone in the department already knew. Below me, the lobby stretched out in familiar patterns. I could still trace the path I used to walk with my mop and bucket, the corners where dust gathered, the brass fixtures that needed polishing every other night. That man felt distant now, though I knew I would never fully leave him behind. That man had survived. This man was learning to live. My phone buzzed. A message from Isaiah's school. "Isaiah wanted us to tell you he got the highest score in his class on today's math test. He's very excited to show you." I smiled, a real smile, the kind Isaiah used to dream about. I typed back a reply to my son. "I'm so proud of you, buddy. Let's celebrate tonight." Then I added another message, the words coming easier than they would have a few months ago. "I haven't won yet, but I didn't give up, and you're the reason I kept going." That evening, Isaiah and I sat on the worn couch in our small apartment. A pizza box lay open on the coffee table, half empty, evidence of a celebration that didn't need to be fancy to feel complete. The television played a cartoon that Isaiah had seen a dozen times, but the boy wasn't really watching. He was leaning against my side, his breathing easy and clear. The new inhaler sat in Isaiah's jacket pocket, fully covered by insurance, refilled without a second thought about the cost. It was a small thing, a plastic tube filled with medicine, but to me it represented everything I had fought for. Isaiah looked up at me. "Dad, are you happy now?" I thought about the question, the same question my son had asked weeks ago. This time the answer came without hesitation. Yeah, buddy, I think I am. Isaiah smiled and nestled closer. Outside the city hummed with its usual noise, but inside the apartment there was only this, a father and son together, in a moment that asked for nothing more than presence. I had learned something in these past months. Sometimes the thing that saves a person isn't a grand opportunity or a sudden stroke of luck. Sometimes it's simply being seen, truly seen by someone who recognizes your worth when the world has decided to look away. And sometimes that someone is an 8-year-old boy who never stopped believing his father was a hero. Looking back on that day, I almost walked out of the interview at Sterling Financial in Chicago. I realized the deepest lesson life ever taught me wasn't just landing the job. It was learning that your worth is never defined by the title on your badge or the gap in your resume, but by the quiet fight you keep showing up for the people you love most. I was running on empty, a single dad mopping those same marble floors at night so I could be home for my son Isaiah every morning after we lost his mom. When they sat across that table and made me feel small because I was still in custodial work and raising a boy with asthma, my pride wanted to keep walking straight out those glass doors and never look back. But then Vivian Sterling chased me down, and in that moment, everything shifted. I saw that real strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up for your child, for the dreams he has of seeing his dad smile again instead of just surviving. The kindness I once offered a scared intern in the middle of the night came full circle when I needed it most, reminding me that the world sometimes sends exactly the right person to see your heart when everyone else has already looked away. Being Isaiah's father showed me that our value isn't decided by other people's assumptions or that polite word culture. It's carved out by the love we refuse to let go of, even when exhaustion and rejection try to take it all. What part of this story hit you right in the heart? Have you ever faced a moment where pride almost made you walk away from something your family needed? Drop your own story or the lesson you took from this in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words mean the world to me. If this moved you even a little, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so we can keep sharing these real, raw stories that remind us we're all stronger than the world tries to tell us we are. Let's keep lifting each other up, one comment, one story at a time.